for us to do a hybrid. Hi, Donna.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the hybrid format, and actually most of our people are online. So welcome everyone from wherever you are, whether you're a relative or friend of Szifra and Jay, or whether you're just interested in this topic. We're so happy to have you. My name is Bridget Cooley from the Pollard Memorial Library, and I am so happy to have Szifra and Jay share their experiences with us tonight. So I will turn it over to them right now.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming. And Bridget, thank you for all the work that you do and the kind of heroic lion's share of things like this. I think we can all attribute to you. So thank you. And for the dozens of correspondences back and forth between us.
And we should note for those of you who are not involved that this is Jack Kerouac's library.
Oh, good point. Good point. So we also want to thank the friends who are on Zoom and family members. I saw my brother Rich on, and potentially some fellow tandem cyclists that we have not met who may be dropping in, and I'll be interested in knowing if that's the case later. We said something earlier to Bridget, and maybe Steph, you heard that as well, that libraries are important. And I don't know if you want to take this one and just say a couple of sentences about your grandmother.
I was just saying, in the 1920s, my grandmother found a library in Oklahoma.
Yeah, which was pretty cool for women to get together, or a woman to mobilize that way. So Jay and I had lots and lots of conversations as we were putting this book together, and I think it would serve us all well to have you, Jay, read what led us to writing this book in the first place.
Okay. Tandem biking is a team sport, and the majority of tandem teams are couples in primary relationship. The communication and cooperation tandems require will challenge any sloppy habits couples have. Our relationship began in midlife, and our time on the tandem helped solidify us as a couple. The challenges the bike presented became a metaphor for the work it took for two independent people to pedal their way into a functional team. Neither my wife nor I had ever ridden a tandem bike until her 49th birthday, the year we met. 11 years after that first spin, 8 years into our marriage, when we had ridden only that one time, my wife Szifra suggested we get a tandem. After some research, we bought one, a bit rashly perhaps, and had been riding it for 2 years when one noonday on a ride near our summer cottage in the Lakes region of New Hampshire, her voice proclaimed loudly, "We should write a book about how riding a tandem is like a relationship." I couldn't see her expression because she was sitting on the seat behind me. Her proclamation was loud because she knew it was hard for me to hear her over the noise of my breathing and the wind in my ears. It was at midweek, and we were riding to a rural area, a mix of old farms, meadows, forests, and new houses. After another dozen revolutions of our pedals, cadence in bike talk, she excitedly added all the coordination, the communication, the negotiations, and the need for cooperation. The tandem is a great relationship metaphor. Those who know Szifra know she rarely has an idea she isn't enthusiastic about. She approaches much of life with unbridled enthusiasm. But this metaphor fairly begged to be expanded on, and for the rest of the ride, we threw ideas back and forth. I'm not used to looking at you sideways. I'm used to looking at you.
Yeah. So what qualified us to write a book about relationships or about tandems in the first place? So it might be useful to know that we're both or each master's level trained counselors, master's degrees in professional counseling. We've done a lot of work with couples and relationships. And when we came together, we had 38 years of combined marriage experience. It may be relevant, probably is very relevant to know that those 38 years comprised 5 marriages between us. So 4 divorces, 1 death. So we learned a lot in that time, which is applicable professionally and personally. So this book is about both of us, but we made the decision as we were putting it together to have Jay's voice be the narrator. And if you don't mind sharing that piece.
Any look back on our history, our journey from 2 single strangers to a tandem team, would seem to beg that both our voices be equally represented in the tale. But Szifra doesn't enjoy writing. She enjoys relating and talking. Writing is one of the few places her enthusiasm gives way to evaluation. She calls herself an editor, not a creator. Although in her 30s, she did co-write a book, Together We Heal, with her collaborator, Kathy Mayer. Since we met, her editing energies have been donated to my authoring endeavors. She reads, edits, and suggests my articles and books into more readable and interesting form. So her proposition that we write a tandem book didn't mean she wanted to draft any part of it. Her input is all over the contents of the story, but the structure, focus, and stories are all shared from my perspective.
Which I'm very grateful for. Jay did really a lot of work, and I do love the editing piece, so it worked really well. Play to our strengths. At the time the book opens, I'm 49, Jay is 51. A young friend of ours who's on this call actually thinks we have a lot in common. So she sets up this we set up this blind date. We meet at Starbucks in Lexington, and within minutes, it's pretty clear to us that we're pretty different, and maybe more different than we are alike. The book describes it this way.
Szifra and I are used to spinning through life at very different speeds. She loves social engagements and new activities. Unusual people, quirky restaurants, and new acquaintances charge her batteries. I like to untangle the details of interactions and glide through periods of quiet introspection. A known restaurant allows me to focus on my dining companion. A new restaurant allows her to make a new friend of the waiter. From the beginning, we worked to fashion a life that left each of us room to do our thing while still moving our relationship forward. It and we thrive in spite of, probably because of, these differences.
So other differences between us besides our restaurant behavior. By the time that we were 18, I lived in one city, Lowell. Jay had been moving around 5 states with his family by the time he was 18. Jay's the son of a congregational minister whose great uncle, do I have enough greats in there? Uncle Robert Livingston was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. If you go to the Boston Public Library and on one of the, what are they called on the floor? The things that are on the floor. The seal on the floor, one of them has Bates in it, and that's the other part of his family. My family, as many of you know, were Holocaust survivors, Jewish Holocaust survivors who came to the US in 1946. So Jay's going to read a piece of this story, and the section we've chosen starts just after we had taken a spill on the bike.
I asked Szifra, "Are you all right?" She brushed off and twisted to examine her legs. "I'll have a bruise on my thigh," she reported. I picked the bike up onto its feet and rolled it back onto the pavement. She came over to her position and asked, "Ready?" "Ready," I returned. She climbed back on, and in doing so, forgave my misstep. When you trust your life and limb to another person and they fail to protect you, remounting is an act of courage. I've also failed to get my foot solidly onto the pavement. We're next to a fire station.
Sorry.
We're gonna let them leave.
Exactly.
There. I've also failed to get my foot solidly onto the pavement when we stopped and we've gone down. I've tried to make too sharp a slow U-turn and the bike hit dirt and slid out from under us. Each time, Szifra brushed herself off and got back on. I'm lucky. In her family, falling off and getting back up were the norm. Disappointments, divorce, and death are all in Szifra's background. Getting on with life was her and her family's tradition and in their character. We struggled a little bit about who was going to read this because we both knew that the odds of us choking up were about equal.
Yeah, I'm already there.
Szifra's father was rabidly protective of his kids. This wasn't theoretical protectiveness. This was war-hardened experience, paid for with the blood of his entire family. To know her story, you have to know his and her mother's. Szifra was her parents' fourth child. Her two old infants in Siberia, where her Jewish parents fled from Poland during the Second World War. Her older living brother was born while her parents were post-war refugees in France. Her younger sister and brother were born in the US, as was Szifra. Europe during the war was a horrendous place for Jews, and her parents' native Poland was at the top of the list of places to get away from. As the German army marched into Poland, Szifra's father volunteered to help his friend's 18-year-old daughter go search the countryside for her older brother who had left to avoid conscription or worse. The situation deteriorated so quickly that the older man and the friend's daughter had an impossible decision to make. Return to their home army and the Polish sympathizers, or flee across the border into the Soviet Union. Rules, propriety, customs, and religion all demanded that to flee together, they had to be married. And so her teenager formed and maintained a loveless union with her older companion, which she upheld until his and then her death. If luck is a relative thing, they were lucky. But escaping the merciless ovens that consumed all their family and friends and losing two war made medical help impossible was a terrible kind of luck. Szifra's life is colored by the lifelong damage the losses wrought on her parents' psyches, and therefore their abilities to parent. This is explained to me while she patiently introduced me to the personal intergenerational trauma that surviving genocide imparts. Trauma gets passed down to at least one or two generations beyond the immediate survivors. Szifra, with its Polish spelling, was her group's name. With that gift came an unexpected spoken responsibility to protect her parents and to never forget that every member of the extended family perished at the hands of the Nazis. Grandma Szifra and her young son were gassed and cremated at Auschwitz. Of the many manifestations of the damage that her father survived, perhaps the most notable was his bizarre and renowned propensity to express explosive irritation. His invectives were profane and profoundly disrespectful of anything that mattered to the other person. His broadsides were built on ugly verbal images that mocked a person's religion, sexuality, or anything else that struck his fancy. He was verbally abusive to customers in the clothing store he and his wife owned, to friends, to anyone who disagreed with his opinion, and to his wife and family. Never physical, but verbally merciless. In one of life's bizarre twists, he was also generous to the downtrodden, laughed with abandon, and was fiercely protective of his children's health and welfare, other than their psychological health. Research shows that verbal abuse from a parent, and perhaps even more than physical abuse, can create a lifelong flinch reaction. And Szifra flinches in the face of any hint of irritation. Szifra's mother was almost universally adored, but the scars of losing her entire family to hate hardened her heart. When she felt wrong, she would abruptly shun an erstwhile friend for a small perceived slight, and this disowning was visited upon Szifra for equally minor missteps. Despite her mother's occasional emotional abandonment and the continued threat of its possibility, Szifra learned to delight in connections with her sister, her friends, and customers of her parents' clothing store. She is a talker of some repute and an extrovert from her youngest moments. Hey.
You got through it. We wrote this book, we edited it, I cannot tell you how many times, and it's amazing to me that, it just wipes me out to imagine when Jay's gonna read it, or again. So, yeah, intergenerational something. It lasts a long time. It's good I learned to manage crying in public somewhere along the way. So trying to switch gears here. It was my idea to buy the Tandem. Jay referenced that, but it was my 60th birthday. Jay was riding a single bike, had started a few years prior. And although I think Jay really wanted the joint activity more, I wanted to do something. So it was my idea to get the Tandem. And I was really nervous. I hadn't ridden a bike since I was 16 years old and had gotten, my license. So the idea of riding a bike was spooky for me. So I set some rules, and Jay was very accommodating. I would say he would just nod, probably knowing that ultimately these rules would not work well. Anyway, my 3 rules: only paved bike paths, fairly flat, no significant hills, which would be most bike paths that were at least the ones I knew about. And if there were any significant downhills on the bike paths that we would encounter, that we would go slowly. Our very first ride started over at Cross Point, right here, Bruce Freeman Trail. And very first ride, little kids who looked at us and started steering into us. People on their lunch breaks walking 3 abreast, and we're coming this way, they're going that way, and they don't move aside. The Tandem is not that easy to maneuver, so I was getting pretty crazy. My plan was just not working at all, and I had no idea what to do. So we addressed this, and if you want to pick it up from here.
Again, from the book, the foot and bike path traffic on the path rapidly drove Szifra crazy. And you need to remember, she's behind me. It's a little difficult for her to see, which makes it worse. And she changed her bike path only rule after a couple of rides. She agreed to an experiment, and I routed us onto one of my quieter, semi-rural riding options. She liked the scenery and quickly grew comfortable with the light to moderate traffic. But riding on roads also meant riding on steeper hills than the bike path. As is the case with those hills, those you go up, you mostly need to also come down. Thus, we came up against her other 2 rules. Our first major climb was on a hill across the lake from our vacation cottage. You cross a 1-lane bridge over a narrow inlet. As we crossed the bridge, a man and young boy were fishing off one side. Ahead, the paved road rose quickly onto the tree and stone-lined hill, which disappeared over a crest way up by the yard of an old farmhouse. The hill was steeper than we had tackled, and its length was unknown. In those days, I was the one who generally pulled most of our weight. I looked at the hill and was skeptical that I could get the bike, Szifra, and me up what I could see, let alone the strong possibility there was more to the hill that we couldn't see. I turned my head a bit and bent my lips to send my words backwards. I don't think we're ready for this. Szifra's voice came back, full of optimism. We can make it. This fit her dad's motto. Why you no try? Perhaps followed by, you prick. And I don't pronounce it the way he does, so.
My father would have said, why you no try?
There you go. I've ridden many hills in my single bike, but doubted my strength and endurance on the Tandem would match this hill's demands. Szifra had ridden almost no hills, but was gung-ho. How could I say no in the face of her enthusiasm? She had already tolerated many things on the bike that I suggested, but which she hadn't imagined she could do. Didn't I also have to listen to my stoker? That's the person behind. Knowing I could always put my foot down if I needed to, I capitulated. Okay, let's try it. We pedaled onto the hill. The road climbed steadily through big mature oaks, monstrous pines, and white birches that squatted in every gap. We slowly wobbled past 2 houses with trikes in the yard and sheds tucked into the edge of the trees. The climb continued beyond the first summit we'd seen. As we approached the second crest, I gasped, "My legs are beat. I'm just about done." Szifra's competitive juices were flowing. She saw it as us against the hill. "We can do this. Let's go." I felt a different sensation. For the first time, I was being pushed up the hill by my stoker. She pedaled hard. She encouraged. She wasn't going to let the hill win. I kept pedaling. We continued to wobble, but we kept going. The incline increased a bit more. As we topped each rise, more hill was revealed. We slowly crept by other farmhouses, more stone walls, and rope swings in large oak trees. We were pushing our lowest gear. My legs burned and Szifra's delight increased. She gasped, "Look at us. We're doing this." Our pace slowed even more as the hill continued, and we started to teeter and weave dangerously close to the gravel shoulder. Szifra finally wondered aloud, "Is there a flat spot where we can stop?" We came over another crest, and up ahead the road finally leveled out a bit, and we could see where the hill ended. The pavement also ended, and the road turned to dirt as it continued on through the pines and more white birches. We had our clear endpoint. So rules 1 and 2 passed into our team's history. We were off the bike path and we were climbing hills. On the way back down the hill, I rode the brakes hard. Only as the incline flattened out did I let gravity dictate our speed across the 1-lane bridge. As we quietly coasted past, the man and boy didn't turn, didn't celebrate our climbing success. Szifra's third rule, to go slow down hills, was ripe for rewriting. A week later, as we climbed on a wide residential street with a series of moderate longleaf hills, I asked, "Do you want to try going downhill a little faster?" She agreed she wanted to see what it felt like. At the top of the next hill, I slowly allowed gravity to accelerate us. I kept squeezing the brakes to drag the pads on the discs, but we started to build up more speed than we ever had. I watched my speedometer, rode the brakes a bit more, and as we coasted out at the bottom, I announced we had hit 30 miles an hour. She surprised me with a confident, "That wasn't so bad." There was another hill right in our face. "Do you want to go any faster on the next one?" "Sure." We climbed the next hill. This time on the way down, we hit over 35 miles an hour. She surprised me with, "That was comfortable. We can try even faster." I let the bike roll on the next one and saw almost 40 some miles per hour on the steepest part. Szifra quickly volunteered, "That was fun." I said I needed to go home and change my shorts. We laughed and she declared, "You can ignore all my rules. I'm fine. I'll tell you if I want to slow down or if I get uncomfortable." Since I had that same right in my hands, it was a fair request.
I will say that it all depends on whether the hill is one of the straight ones or the curvy ones. I'm not as comfortable. Luckily, Jay does not like speed any more than I do, really. So we're a really good match for that. In our lives, I'm speedy, but on the bike, we're kind of matched. So switching gears, so to speak, as I did this today and I was like, oh, that was good metaphor. Switching gears for our last, the last reading we're going to do. There's a common expression among, maybe among tandem people, but maybe others too, that wherever your relationship was headed, a tandem bike will get you there faster. So the implication for a lot of people is that the tandem is really a divorce machine, what some people call a divorcicle. And for us, we've really lucked out, or the tandem just has not been that for us. The tandem for us really provides a lot of relationship glue, a lot of respite from the day-to-day, whatever we're doing. And when we were, sometimes we're trying sometimes to think about how to talk about these things in a clever way or a funny way. Yesterday, I was thinking that I'm going to read this because I don't have it yet, but I said, our tandem is like a marriage counselor that lives in our garage, always on call for whenever we want to reconnect with one another and disconnect from the stresses of regular life, which is actually easier than a lot of marriage counseling. So for us, each ride tends to really strengthen and add to our affection for one another. So that's good. And then, of course, things can also get tangled up with us, with life.
And if you want to know about the marriage counseling, you'll have to read the book yourself. But early on, we don't always agree about when we need to process a tangle in our relationship, whether to crunch our way up an emotional hill or to ride down the road and ignore the issue. But as a team, we need to agree on a joint tactic about when to spin and when to crunch. There's a similar situation when we're faced with working our way up an emotional hill together. It was easy for one of us to feel we were doing all the work while the other soft pedals. Soft pedaling means taking some pressure off the pedals while still turning them, i.e. not working that hard. On a bike, occasionally the chain might slip off the gears and just hang limply. The pedals turn uselessly and momentum quickly dissipates. The first time we seriously slipped our relationship chain was over a perceived difference about veracity. The tangle was about Szifra's hand size. I made the mistake of not paying attention to the fact that she has unusually large hands for a small woman, or a medium woman, or a big woman. We were walking hand in hand on a dirt path along the Charles River. A lot of people out there are thinking I'm making a mistake here. The wide brownish green water flowed languidly past us toward Boston and the sea as we walked quietly upstream, enjoying the warm spring weather. We spent enough time together in the previous few days that we were satiated with each other's company and ripe for small differences to bother our sense of independence. Szifra casually commented, "I have a really big hands for a woman." I glanced down at them. They looked normal, and I responded, "They don't look big." What I didn't say was that I was so taken with her that I really hadn't paid much attention to small details, other than those sparkling eyes. She then declared her feet were also large for a woman of her modest stature, and got irritated when I didn't quickly agree. Apparently not noticing her hands and feet or quickly confirming that her impression of them made my veracity suspect. My family would have called that being polite. Her family tended to comment bluntly about odd characteristics of other people and their biological processes. We sure weren't spinning at the same speed on this one. Szifra's accusation and upset left me incredulous. I defended my ignorance of the limits of normal hand size as reasonable. I wouldn't have commented even if I had noticed, but I hadn't noticed. I told her she shouldn't evaluate veracity when I hadn't noticed. She didn't back down. She was determined I wasn't being straightforward with her. She said I was bullshitting her. I looked carefully at her hands and had her hold them up against mine. They're about the same size, maybe a bit smaller. I said, "Okay, your hands are big. Now what? Are we talking about whether I would have been honest if I had noticed? I have a different sense of what's polite to say. I might not have said anything, but don't hang me because of a possible future felony. Tell me your standard and then see if I can or want to meet it." There were a few tense weeks as I got synced with the fact that the woman I was dating wanted me to name her appendages as oversized, to PU her farts, to talk hard facts, not my soft lover's impressions. My priority was apparently supposed to be demonstrating there was no BS in our relationship. I liked focusing on the delights of her hand in mine, not the potential she had disquieting quirks of asymmetry. I was the delusional one, but for her, I would regularly try to be amazed at the span of her fingers and the width of her palm. I liked focusing on the delight. In the long run, it wasn't enough of a tangle to tear us apart. I now comment on the gargantuan size of her hands and feet every chance I get. She laughs and often says, "Stable in the storm," her comforting rejoinder to a comment made by a thoughtless adult when she was young. "Oh, you don't need skis." And we go on with whatever we're doing. that we should come into that early conversation from such different places and turn a tangle into a joint understanding captures the arc of our attempts to bring our two lives into sync. The arc that the tandem eventually enhanced and sped up. And by the way, I still occasionally steal careful looks at her hands and feet to see if I would now rate them as big. I don't dare tell her that I'm still of the opinion her size 10.5 feet aren't that big.
It was a really big fight for us. I was really, really mad because I didn't trust. My concern, of course, was that if he would make some comment like that, what else would I not know? So I extrapolated all kinds of things that were very inaccurate.
And I tend to keep my hands in my pockets so Sugar can't evaluate my hand size.
So basically, you're getting a flavor for what this book is about, right? We're bringing you into our lives. Friends of ours who know us really well are surprised at some of the things that we've shared that we didn't know were that private, but I think we have a broken gauge for what gets shared and what doesn't. So we'll be interested in your thinking about that or your impressions. And mostly just want to, thank everyone again. Thank everyone who's attending on Zoom. For those of you who decide to read the book, there's a cool piece about professional, the camera's out here. Professional,
You can look wherever
it's
you
very
want. It
hard,
catches
it's
you on
very
profile.
hard to see everybody's face
I thought
out
you were
there.
playing captain on the tandem.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I can't see my brother Rich to say that there's a whole section about, my brother Rich is a professional communicator as well. And we thought we understood something he told us about cycling. And you'll discover that Jay and I, me, didn't hear what he actually said, but we're very grateful for the mistaken interpretation of what he didn't say. So I don't know who else is up there to thank, but thank you to everyone. And thank you to Jay for many, many, many hours on this book and in our relationship.
And we would be wide open to answering any questions you may have about tandems, relationship, marriage counseling, hand size, whatever.
So I'm gonna stop recording and then that way everybody can you can see everybody go live.
Okay.